a real pleasure to be here at UCLA again. It's a special pleasure for me to give a talk in honor of my old friend, Al Harberger. Our friendship goes back, I guess, probably 46 years, when the first time I visited as a young graduate student at the University of Chicago. Then he tried to recruit me to Chicago. I don't know if he wanted me to make me into a Chicago economist. Those of you who don't know, there's a particular association that we call the Chicago economist. I don't think he would have succeeded, but he did have an enormous influence on me and everybody of my generation for the work that he did. Really influential work of thinking, again, as I was saying, rationally about economic policy. About costs and benefits, how do you measure costs, how do you think about benefits. And in the subsequent years, I involved in a lot of theoretical work on the theory of cost-benefit. My work in public finance, which was very much influenced by his work. And then just a few years ago, I turned to, you might say, a very unpleasant task, which was using that kind of framework to think about war, and in particular, a little venture that we had in Iraq, and asking, difficult to figure out what the benefits were, but at least we should figure out what the costs were, and engaged in a really extensive analysis using the kind of framework that he's laid out, which had not really been done before. People don't think of this is a realm where you ought to use rational calculus. At least you ought to know what the costs are. Mike Interrogator, one of your mapping numbers, has been very active in promoting thinking about military expenditures in this way. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is not on these topics. It's really on the economic crisis. And I'll hopefully during maybe the question period we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about the implications of the crisis on developing countries, on international implications. But I want to spend most of my time this afternoon talking about the domestic aspects of the crisis. I probably don't have to remind most of you that even though it's 4 years since the breaking of the bubble, it's been 2.5 years since the collapse of Lehman Brothers. We've been pulled back from the brink that we stood at that point, but the crisis is not over. The economy is not back to health. And there are many ways that you can see this. Most dramatic in the labor market. Some of you who are graduating will confront this reality, unfortunately, all too soon. The statistic that I find most descriptive is the fact that almost 1 out of 6 Americans who would like a full-time job can't get one. This is higher than the official unemployment rate of 8.8%, but there are large numbers of people who are what we call discouraged workers. They look for jobs for a year or two, and after you look for a job for a year or two, you get discouraged, and so they stop looking. And the statistics, and this is important for you who are students, and you look at statistics, you have to know how they are generated. Well, the way we do unemployment statistics, you are not called unemployed if you have not been looking for a job in the last 4 weeks. You have to be actively searching for a job. But of course, if you've given up looking, you're not employed. It's clear that you're not employed. It's just that they don't call you unemployed. And we gather data that gives us a broader picture of what is going on, and that broader picture gives this picture of a lot of people who have accepted part-time work because they couldn't get a full-time job, a lot of people who dropped out of the labor force, a lot of people who've gone out and accepted disability payments because they have a slight disability, they want to work, but there just aren't any jobs for them. Equally disturbing, this is the first time since the data has been collected in the United States that more than 40% of Americans who are unemployed have been unemployed for more than 6 months. We used to have a dynamic labor market, and our unemployment insurance reflects this, that people lose their job, and then they get a new job. But increasingly, this is not the case. And a new category has been originated called 99-weekers. People who've been unemployed for more than 99 weeks, for which there is essentially no safety net in the United States. Now, this is not the way a market economy is supposed to work. It's supposed to be efficient. It's not supposed to create bubbles that lead to massive misallocation of resources. The basic economic models that we teach talk about demand and supply, and market equilibrium being where demand equals supply. And market equilibrium in the labor market is where demand equals supply, and that means no unemployment. And there are some schools of economics, believe it or not, who actually believe that what is going on now is not unemployment. They just think that some people have decided to enjoy a little bit more leisure. And when I ask them why are they so unhappy, if they, usually when you have a vacation, you feel happy. And they say, well, that's not a problem with economics, that's a problem for psychiatry. But I think there is a problem in our labor market. There is a real problem with unemployment. In fact, if you look at how our markets work, financial markets have a very well-defined task in our society. They're supposed to manage risk, they're supposed to allocate capital, they're supposed to provide credit for small and medium-sized enterprises, for new enterprises, they're supposed to make sure funds are used well and risk is well managed. Well, the financial sector didn't do this. It misallocated capital, it created risk, and the outcome, of course, we all know. Where they excelled was exploiting poor and uneducated, in predatory lending, in abusive credit card practices, and most importantly, they excelled in investments in one area, Washington. Their political investments succeeded in getting them first deregulation, then massive bailouts, and then preventing the kind of re-regulation that would really ensure the stability of our economy going forward. So the result of this is that in the period before the crisis, their political investments, which, as I say, paid far better than their economic investments, led to the stripping away of regulations, the refusal to adopt new regulations to deal with the new products like derivatives, credit default swaps, and equally importantly, appointing regulators who didn't believe in regulation. And guess what? If you have regulators who don't believe in regulation, you're not going to get very effective regulation. And we didn't. Well, what I want to talk about this afternoon is what are the lessons for economic policy, for economics? How do we explain the failure of markets and of government actions intended to resuscitate the economy? They seemingly didn't work, and today the government is burdened down with debt. Debt problems not only in the United States, but elsewhere, and I'll try, if I have time, to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to divide my remarks into first the diagnosis, then our response to the crisis, why it didn't work, and then finally a brief discussion of where we are today. One way of understanding the diagnosis of what happened before the crisis is to understand that, in a sense, before the crisis, the economy was really weak. We just didn't know it. We have to ask why it was weak and why we didn't know it. Well, in a sense, there was inadequate aggregate demand. The demand for goods was insufficient. One of the reasons that is insufficient to generate jobs for all the people in the economy, or would have been, had we not taken certain actions. The reason for the weakness in the economy are many, but one of them is the growing inequality that was alluded to before. The magnitude of this growth in inequality is really big striking. Sometimes people say that watching inequality, changes in inequality, is like watching grass grow. It happens very slowly, but after a while, you can see something's happening.